What's going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek, back at you guys with another episode here. I know it's a little bit later than we typically like to record these previews, but we are here, and we just finished with our friends over at the Cannon Fire podcast, and they do a great job over there. We were able to hop onto their show, and we just kind of decided, hey, due to how late it is, we just wanted to kind of let you in on our conversation with them. It's a great conversation all about Colts and Bucks. And we didn't want to rehash kind of some of the similar things that we'd be talking about, Derek. And so we're just going to show you guys here and let you in on the conversation that we had with them, because it's a really great conversation. So for you guys who are used to kind of the format here that we record on, it's going to look a little bit different, just so you're aware. But let's jump into that, Derek. I'm really excited about the conversation we had with both Evan and Redicus over there. They did a great job. So without further ado, we'll hop into it.
Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire podcast live on YouTube today. I'm your host, as always, Rip Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucksNation.com, Evan Wanish. Joining us today, I love collaborating with these guys, and whenever our two teams get together, we get to talk to them. Joining us from the Bring the Juice Colts podcast, Derek Larger and Cody Felger. Pleasure to have you guys back on the podcast as we preview this week's matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Indianapolis Colts. A couple of teams coming into this week, I mean, must-win games for both of these ball clubs here. You know, floating on the edge of mediocrity, the Bucs at 4-6, still in contention for a very ugly division in the NFC South, but you know, a tough couple of games here ahead, and it starts with this Indianapolis team. You're looking to bounce back against a tough loss last week against a vastly superior San Francisco 49er football team, and the Bucs also coming into this one a little bit hurt. So overall, mixed feelings all around coming into this one, but a very winnable game for both teams here this week. But boys, first and foremost, how are we doing? Evan, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah. And I mean, two teams that, don't play each other a ton. It's not like the Bucks and Colts have this huge history. Of course, the last time these two teams played was a pretty wild game, actually, where it was sort of back and forth, a pretty high scoring game. Leonard Fournette scoring with a few seconds left, and the Colts almost winning the game because the kickoff almost got returned. Kind of a wild game. So we'll see what type of game we're in store for here. But yeah, I mean, I do agree. Obviously, the Colts are coming off their bye week, coming off 2 straight wins as well, though. So they're sitting at 5-5, and they suddenly, they find themselves in the mix for a playoff spot. So they sort of need this win too to get over 500. And yeah, the Buccaneers, I mean, going 3 games under 500 just would not be a recipe for success, especially if they're trying to win the AFC South. So yeah, both teams in need of a win here.
So guys, how are Colts fans feeling at this juncture of the season? I mean, a big surprise and the biggest news of the week is the departure of linebacker Shaquille Leonard, who's been, a former All-Pro on that defense. He's been a staple at the linebacker position. Where do you guys feel this season is taking you so far? And with what you have left, how are you feeling?
Well, I mean, I could definitely start by saying that I think that the general interest in the team has definitely not been as great as we would have liked, given the fact that Anthony Richardson went out really early in the season. That's kind of what this whole season was about, was, finding a way to get Anthony Richardson on the field, see what he can do, and then look forward to 2024. Even amongst, the quarterback changes, your star running back wasn't ready for the first 4 games of the season. And then you had all these injuries and a coaching change. And then, of course, obviously what you're seeing with Shaquille Leonard. I mean, even amongst all of that, you still find yourself at 5-5 after your bye, still with a chance to, still have a chance to make the AFC playoff picture. I mean, we are only in that 9th seed right now, but if we win this game and one other team loses that we need to, there's a possibility this team could actually get back into the playoff picture. So, I mean, if you're a Colts fan right now, I mean, you're definitely thinking, for everything we've had to deal with, this season is actually still going relatively good, given all the things we've had to see.
Yeah, I tell you what, guys, the last couple of years, just being an Indianapolis Colts fan, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. some really high highs and then some really low lows. You mentioned the 2021 game. Actually, I was at that game. It was a pretty wild game, all things considered. And I remember, we talked in that game and previewed that game beforehand. But just since that season with the Carson Wentz stuff, he actually had a pretty good game in that game, if I'm not mistaken. He actually played pretty decent. But anyway, it's been a lot of crazy stuff. And then obviously the culmination of everything last year with Frank Reich being fired midseason, Jeff Saturday coming on, all that, losing all those games you did. I tell you, man, and Derek, you can probably agree with me on here. It's been a breath of fresh air this year, despite some of the challenges with Anthony Richardson missing some time, some different players going down. I mean, Shane Steichen has been just such a good find for the Indianapolis Colts this year at head coach. It's night and day from what they had previously and in so many different aspects. And you mentioned the Shaquille Leonard news. I think that's one of the things you see from Shane Steichen that, frankly, no pun intended, you just didn't see from the previous regime. And that thing called accountability, which is so easy to say but so hard to practice. And people like to think of Shaq as from what he was even in 2021. He just hasn't been the same player the last couple of years. The injuries and all that stuff. He just hasn't been the player that we're so used to. And the Colts, holding him accountable there and setting that standard and holding that line. It's been refreshing to see because it's been the most notable news, but it's not been it's been a pretty common trend for Shane Steichen and company this year is, when they say accountability, they're actually going to practice it. They're going to practice what they preach. And so, yeah, it's definitely tough and shocking. And, from a player from Shaq who's been, so involved with this team for so many years and made so many big plays for the organization, it definitely was surprising when they did it. But I think it sends a really strong message to the locker room that, it doesn't matter if you're, a high round pick, if you're getting paid nearly $20 million a year, if you're not performing and you're hurting the football team, ultimately, that's not going to fly. So it's definitely been refreshing despite some of the things this year and the fact that the Colts have already surpassed their win total from a year ago. I know some people like to play the tankathon game, but hey, you know what? If you're building that winning culture and, if you're setting that standard now, I mean, I've loved it's been so refreshing this year despite some of the challenges.
Yeah, injury is going to be a big part of the conversation this week as we dive into the game, at least for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A couple of confirmed players out on the defensive side of the ball. That is team captain Levante David, who is the most sure tackler they have there in that linebacker room. Jamel Dean at the cornerback position, and Mike Green, a recent addition who did not travel with the team. And now there are a couple of guys who are considered questionable for this game as well. Devin White with an injury, Carlton Davis at the cornerback position, and now Rashad White, who was not on the injury report at all this week, but pops up with a knee injury, and he is going to be a game time decision as with the rest of those guys on that questionable list. So let's just dive right into it and let's talk about where the Bucs are on defense this week, because it's an interesting situation, not only with the starters that you have out already, but the reliance on these younger guys, because that's what's going to have to happen this week. And they have been a hot topic of conversation for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers these last few weeks. They have been playing well. Guys like Kalijah Kancey, Yaya Diaby getting more meaningful reps on the defensive line. And now another rookie in the fold, Servassier Dennis, potentially going to be playing some more meaningful snaps. Maybe you see KJ Britt in there playing some more meaningful snaps at a third-year linebacker. But there are a lot of guys on this defense who the Bucs are going to be relying on this week. And I don't know if this is the week for them to do it, just because, one, you're missing all of those starters. And, on top of that, we've had to lean on this defense every single week this season, aside from maybe one. And I don't know. I don't know what kind of challenge they are in store for this week with the Indy offense being what it is. I know they're definitely going to try and run the ball with Jonathan Taylor this week. At least that's what my gut says. But Evan, how do you feel about the Bucs defense headed into this one? Definitely shorthanded.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. And, you're hoping that Devin White and Carlton Davis, even though both players have struggled this season, especially at times, I think a lot of Bucs fans have pointed to Carlton Davis and Devin White as two main reasons why when the Bucs defense struggles, it's a lot on them. So you're hoping those two guys can play. If you don't, I mean, you're going to be down 2 starting linebackers, 2 starting corners. I mean, that's not going to be easy. I do believe Servassier Dennis is definitely going to be playing a lot more. So that's a young player. I think Josh Hayes, the 7th-round pick from Kansas State this past year, I think he is another guy who could be playing a lot more as well. So I wonder if Indy, you say you think they want to run the ball. I wonder if they sort of maybe look to attack this Tampa secondary, especially if Carlton Davis is out as well, because then you're looking at it as who else scares you in that secondary besides Antoine Winfield Jr.? It's going to be D. Delaney, Ryan Neal, Josh Hayes, Zion McCullum at corner. So I could see, guys like Michael Pittman Jr. possibly having a good day here if Gardner Minshew is able to get time. And as for, the time aspect of it, yeah, okay, the Buccaneers don't have any real pass rushers on the injury report, but they've struggled to get pressure consistently with 4 guys. So let's say they wanted to send Levante David on a blitz or send Devin White on a blitz. They might not be able to do that now with a guy like Savate Dennis or KJ Britt. So that limits their ability to do that. And I do think that with this defense being shorthanded, I don't think it automatically means, the Colts are going to score 35 points, but I do think you could see some sloppiness out there that normally you wouldn't see from certain groups, being the linebacker group, like you said, Levante David being such a short tackler and so good at this old age, you would think he slows down, but he doesn't. Devin White's explosiveness, even though it does come with the inconsistency. And I think that, there will be times where maybe you see some lapses on the defense on Sunday. I do think that the Colts could take advantage of that from time to time.
And let's be fair here, talking statistically with where the Bucs rank in defensive efficiency, with Levante David, with Jamel Dean, with Carlton Davis, with all of these guys on the field, the Bucs still average 270.7 yards given up through the air per game, which is number 31 in the NFL. This secondary has been picked on all year, and it is easy to throw the ball on them. That's what it is. But I talk about that reliance on younger talent, and this is where I bring up that run game, because while the Bucs have done one thing well on defense this year, the red zone defense is still number 1 in the NFL. But on the other side of that, they've done a really good job shutting down the run. But I want to attribute all of the guys who are not playing this week to that. Devin White not being 100%, Levante David not even being out there. I know Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean don't do a whole lot for this run game, but there's just a lot of inexperience, and you're expecting a big week from your backup interior defensive line. Guys like Kalijah Cansey, who have been playing well, but he may be a better pass rush guy than a run support guy at this point. Vita Vea, who leads the team in sacks. Logan Hall, who, he is what he is at this point. So you're relying on a lot of young talent, and it makes me think that while this has been a strength, the run defense so far this season, it could be a huge weakness this week, especially if Jonathan Taylor gets going early in this game. But I'll toss it over to you guys. Cody, what do you think is on the docket for the Colts offensive game plan this week? And there's a couple of different weak points of this Buccaneers defense, which has been stout so far this season, but a couple of different ways they can approach it this week. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because the last couple of weeks, it's been probably the worst you've seen the Colts offense look this whole year. Gardner Minshew, for a while, the Colts were pushing the ball down the field and they were, making some things happen. And then we've kind of seen him kind of take a step back in terms of, because it was like, it would be the big plays, but you'd have the turnovers. And now it was like you eliminate the turnovers, but now you're not getting the big plays. And so I'm thinking what the Colts are going to probably try to do is get Minshew comfortable early, get the ball out of his hands quickly, because he's a guy that he can make the throws down the field. He doesn't have the biggest arm, but he still can do it. And the Colts have done a pretty good job of protecting him as of recent. So I think what they're going to try to do, I think you're right. They're going to try to establish that run. They're going to try to get him comfortable early and not make him throw it the majority of the time. I think that's been kind of the thing. While, the Bucs have a really good run defense, the Colts, the last couple weeks, they've kind of struggled a little bit to run the football effectively, which is kind of surprising because, with Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss, who are a really good 1-2 punch, I would say, I think it's been just the lack of being able to push the ball down the field effectively. And so I think if the Colts can do that, that'll take the pressure off of, this running game and trying to rely on them. And then, having Gardner Minshew have to throw it. And that's just not the way that you win football games with Gardner Minshew. So I'm thinking they're going to try to establish that run early, but also get Gardner Minshew comfortable back there. Because sometimes he holds onto the ball. He tries to make a play happen. And he creates his own pressure. That's what we saw a lot against the Patriots, is there would be no pressure. And he senses that phantom pressure, and then he runs into a sack or he runs into a quarterback hit. And you're just like, what are you doing? Like, step in the pocket and make the throw. He was just missing guys. And I don't want to take all what Derek's going to say, because I know we've talked about this a lot the last couple of weeks. But, it's just Gardner Minshew's just got to play better ball. He's got to be smarter. He's got to be more accurate. And I think the way the Colts can do that is if they can take the pressure off of Gardner Minshew to go and win the game for them, and they can get back to running the football effectively, I think that's going to go, really, really well for them. But again, it goes both ways, because if the Colts can run the ball effectively, then hopefully they can take the pressure off. But if they can push the ball down the field a little bit more to, you mentioned a Bucs secondary that's very, very exposed, like they can be exposed. If they can do that, I think that's just going to go well for both units. And so it's kind of a take and give a little bit with it. But I do think that's kind of been the issue with them, is because of their lack of their, I guess, predictability the last couple of weeks. It's kind of really hurt their run game, I think, because teams know they haven't been able to really beat them down the field. But I do think they have the pieces at tight end and receiver to do that. I think the problem, honestly, has just been Gardner Minshew the last few weeks for the Colts. So if he can get back to what he was doing, say, in that Cleveland game where he pushed the ball down the field effectively, and the Colts offense was, mind you, against one of the best, if not the best defenses in the NFL. If he can get back to doing that and eliminate a few of the turnovers, I think the Colts will be just fine. And I think the bye week couldn't have come at a better time, because the last 2 weeks the Colts have played offense, it hasn't been pretty. Like you mentioned, the Bucs having to rely on their defense. Well, that's what the Colts have had to do the last 2 wins they've had. Although it looks pretty on the win column, it hasn't been 2 pretty wins at all, especially in the offensive side of things. So they got to get back to their winning ways. And, Shane Steichen, being the offensive mind he is, I have to believe he's going to have some more things figured out here for this offense, because it kind of got stuck in neutral the last 2 weeks.
Cody left me a lot of information there to run with.
Sorry.
It's all good, but yeah, I mean, this bye week, like you said, could not have come at a better time. Some of the injuries that we had to deal with, being able to get some guys back. Unfortunately, with Ryan Kelly, our center, is not going to be playing in this game. And he's been the number one center all year. I mean, he's been the best center in football. So, being that anchor in the middle, that's going to be tough for Wesley French to be able to handle that responsibility, especially since, we know how Tampa Bay has been over the last several years at playing against the run. We know that they can stop it. We know they got big boys in the middle that are impossible to move. So, that makes it tough for them. But, I mean, it's one thing for Indy. We've kind of seen it recently where Steichen really likes to get the run game going early and then just go to almost a straight pass attack. Just kind of out of the blue. The first drive or two goes to the running backs. I mean, in that game against New England, there were 10 plays ran on the first drive. 9 of them were runs to either Zach Moss or Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor touched the ball, I think it was 9 times on the opening drive. So, I mean, they like to get Jonathan Taylor started early. One thing you didn't see in the New England game, or even in the Carolina game for the most part, was Zach Moss. And I think that Steichen is going to get them more involved, both of them now, because you need to keep both of them fresh. And I think Zach Moss, especially being in like that red zone opportunity, will be huge, because he's the bruiser, he's the brawler, he's the guy that's gonna make it really difficult for defenses to have to continue to try and tackle him. As far as everything else goes, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how the Colts attack it. Like Cody was saying, with the first couple games that Gardner Minshew came in to be the starter, it's kind of done a 180 where he was doing phenomenal against really good defenses like the Jaguars defense, the Cleveland defense, was throwing for over 300 yards a game, was throwing for a couple touchdowns each game. Like he had those going, but the problem was, like he said, too many turnovers, and it cost the Colts games. That's why they kept losing those games, because Gardner Minshew couldn't get out of his own way. Now he's being the ultimate game manager. Don't turn the ball over, and we'll be able to do just enough to be able to win the game. Now, obviously, you don't want to go in with that kind of game plan every week, and especially not against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are a team that grinds for everything they get. So I don't think that we're going to look into that. Steichen is certainly going to try and figure out a game plan to try and work somewhere in a happy middle, being able to see Gardner Minshew make a couple more throws. But like Cody said at the beginning, it's difficult to really say that now, because Gardner Minshew has completely flipped over the last couple weeks, and it has not been good performances. So if there was ever a week that Indy was going to take advantage of throwing the football, you guys said it before, it might be this week, but I'm still not sold on Gardner Minshew to do that.
And it's a shame about Gardner Minshew, because he was my guy. The Bucs were in the market for a quarterback, in the category of a stopgap quarterback, a free agent you bring in on a 1-year deal to try out. And there was a list, guys like Derek Carr were on that list for the Bucs, even though he was probably a little too pricey anyways. But Baker Mayfield and Gardner Minshew were like 1 and 2 on that list. And I was a Gardner truther. I still think Minshew Mania can turn it around at some point this season, but I don't know. It seems like, once you hit that 180, and it's as obvious as it is where you're failing the eye test every single week, I don't know if you can shake off that reputation at this point in the season. But I don't know. I got my fingers crossed. But we talk a little bit more about the Buccaneers defense this week, and I will wrap it up with this. I think the Bucs defense, the biggest difference maker for them this week is going to be that pass rush. It's going to be what that defensive line can do, and even more so what they can do rushing 4 down linemen, because we've talked about that time in and time out so far this season. You have to get pressure with just 4 down linemen, and it's been a grind, kind of like you said. It hasn't been night and day progress, but I will tell you, the improvements we have seen from the young guys so far in this defense, Yaya Diaby already with 4 sacks this season, and it feels like he's barely played. I mean, you compare him to the rest of the defensive starters with the snap counts, he's definitely not making too much of a dent. So he's been effective. Kalijah Cansey, when he's been healthy, he's been effective, and the Bucs are going to have to lean on both of those guys in this pass rush this week. I mean, even the rest of the guys who are healthy obviously have to step up, but Gardner Minshew has proved that he may not be the type of guy that, I don't know, is going to take over the game, clearly. But he is the type of guy who you can coax into making some mistakes. And I think that's how the Bucs are going to get him this week. I don't know if it's going to be sacks. I think it's just going to have to be constant pressure. But if the Colts are in a situation where the run game doesn't work and they have to force Gardner Minshew to throw the ball 40 times, I don't know if that's going to be a recipe for success. But Evan, your final thoughts on the Bucs defense before we talk about the other side of the football here.
Yeah, I found it interesting, what the guy said about Gardner Minshew, essentially running into sacks at times and creating his own pressure. And I think that's something that would help the Bucs because, like we just talked about, and like you mentioned, the pass rush is going to be a key. And quite frankly, when the Bucs haven't blitzed, they haven't had much success. So, it's going to be important for guys like Shaq Barrett, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and a lot of the other guys to be able to step up and play well in this game and create those timely sacks and also turnovers. I mean, the Buccaneers defense was so good early in the season at getting turnovers, and they've cooled down a little bit for sure. That the Colts guys did say that, the lack of explosive plays leads to less turnovers, and that's, there's definitely a correlation with that. But at the same time, I still think there might be an opportunity here for the Buccaneers to maybe get a pick or two. And it's like we talk about the injury report, it's going to have to be an inexperienced player stepping up. There's going to have to be somebody like a Servase Dennis or Josh Hayes. One of these guys is going to have to step up and play well, because if they don't, it could be a long day for the defense. And it's a lot of young players, and when things aren't going well for young players, sometimes it can snowball. So hopefully it doesn't have to be that way on Sunday, and hopefully the Bucks can ride the momentum of their defense, and hopefully the defense can carry them to, have the offense be in position to be successful.
On the other side of the football, as we break down the Buccaneers offense headed into this one, an even more critical week for them now with the questionable status of Rachaad White. If you don't have Rachaad White this week, man, oh man, is this going to be an important game for Baker Mayfield. Less check down options, obviously. The emergence of Rachaad White in this passing game, I think, is one of the biggest reasons we have seen not necessarily a resurgence, but a nice uptick in efficiency week in and week out. Rachaad White, I think, second in the NFL in running back receiving yards, which you love to see his production over the last few weeks. But it's an unproductive rushing attack. Rachaad White, he hasn't proven to be the 3-down back the Bucs want him to be, but he's the only reason they have any semblance of a run game. So now you're going to be dressing potentially Chase Edmonds and your boy Keyshawn Vaughn here for this game, unless they decide to activate Sean Tucker, which we haven't heard that news, so I doubt they will. What are your thoughts, Evan, as this Buccaneers offense, I don't want to say they come in handicapped or maybe limited, even more limited than they usually are, because the run game isn't going to be there. You still have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and maybe a big day for Baker throwing the ball, but you're also going to be potentially counting on Baker Mayfield to throw the ball upwards of 35, 40 times, which for the Bucs is above that magic number they like to keep him at. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, I don't really think missing out on Rachaad White is huge in terms of the run game. I do think, like you said, it hurts you more in the passing game, especially recently. Rachaad White the past 3 or 4 weeks has been a real weapon in the passing game for this Buccaneers offense, and really has opened it up and made it look better. So not having him is going to hurt. A guy like Chase Edmonds, who has experience catching the ball, is going to have to step up in that fashion. So and that's just, if Rachaad White doesn't play, he's questionable. It just kind of sucks that, he's added to the injury report late. So clearly something's bothering him there. And you hope that if he does play, that he's, he can be at 100% and be efficient enough for the Buccaneers to be able to be productive, that when you do catch the ball, like, are you going to, you're going to be a little bit slower, or could you re-injure it? So that's what you're sort of hoping there. But in terms of the actual run game, look, I think we've all, the Colts fans don't really know this, but the Bucs can't run the ball, okay? And a lot of Bucs fans before the season thought they'd be able to. Now, sort of as we're over halfway done the season, Bucs fans have pretty much accepted this team isn't going to be able to run the ball like crazy, right? They're just not going to be able to do it. So I don't really think it's a huge loss in terms of that. I do think, though, it does limit you in the passing game. And you're right, it is going to put more pressure on the quarterback when you don't have your starting running back. I mean, that is going to put more pressure on Baker Mayfield. And you hope that he doesn't have to throw the ball 35, 40 times, because that would likely mean a lot more incompletions as well. You hope it's efficient, but we'll have to wait and see.
There hasn't been a game this season, aside from maybe Houston, where the offense has had to put the team on their back and go win the game. And this week they may potentially have to do that. Like, we're talking about potential of big plays for the defense, and if they come up with them, that's great. But you're still going to have to score points, and you're still going to have to find ways to move this ball. And they have done that. I will talk about Rachaad White being a big part of that success, and he is still questionable. He could be active on Sunday, and we still hope that he is. But, this offense has shown improvement. I'd argue they've shown improvement even since the Houston game. I know it's only been a couple of weeks, but they were moving the ball pretty well.
The Houston game, they were really good. I mean, I would say ever since that Atlanta game, I think the Atlanta game, the offense was bad. Like, the Atlanta game, the offense was really bad. They lost them that game, basically. But ever since then, like, the offense has gotten better. So, I mean, really quick, I wanted to throw it to Derek. When you're looking at this Colts defense, what is the strength? Because honestly, it's going to be completely real with y'all. I don't watch a ton of Colts games. Like
good.
I'm not sitting here watching a ton of Colts games. So when you're looking at this defense, what is the strength? I mean, they've only allowed 19 points over the last 2 games. I know it's against the Panthers and Patriots, so not the best competition, but it's still the NFL. 19 points over the last 2 games is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, and ironically enough, I think it's crazy because our pass defense has actually been our strength as of this year. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts typically aren't a bad defense against the run. Now, this year they have been. They haven't been great against the run, and that was before our big defensive tackle, Grover Stewart, ended up, having to be suspended because of PEDs and whatnot. And so he is one of the best run stopping defensive tackles in the entire NFL. And he's going to miss this game because of that suspension. So what the Colts were already not great at coming into this matchup, they're going to be even worse. I think ever since Grover Stewart has missed, I think the Colts are giving up on average like 125, 130 yards a game rushing. So they're not good at stopping the run this year. And it's amazing that the pass defense has been the best because we've been decimated in the secondary. We're already so young going into this year. And Kenny Moore is the only vet really in that unit. And he's been phenomenal over the last couple of weeks. Kenny Moore has really shined, and he had those 2 pick sixes against the Carolina Panthers. He made their life absolutely terrible. And he's been great over the whole season, really. And, we had Juju Brents earlier in the year. He's still not playing in this game. Had a quad injury, and it's just not healing very fast. Darrell Baker Jr., he's been benched. He's the only reason he's playing now is because of how low we are on the chart when it comes to the injuries. We're missing out on a couple other people. Dallas Flowers, our other starting corner for this year, had an ACL injury, and he's out now. So, you're on to your fifth string guys on the outside right now for Indy. But nevertheless, it's not been bad for us because outside of it, I mean, Kenny Moore's been great being in the slot, but then your safeties, Rodney Thomas and Julian Blackmon, both are having really great seasons this year. So teams are not really stretching the field too much in the back, which is really nice. But outside of that, I mean, it's crazy because we have a really solid front four, but yet we're just not able to really slow the run that much. Even with Zaire Franklin, who's the leading tackler in the NFL this year, still hasn't quite been the difference maker at stopping the run. So, for a team, like you said, for you guys that doesn't run the football very well, that certainly is the weakness for Indy, and it's certainly the strength being able to stop big plays in the pass game.
I think it's unfortunate that Rachaad White popped up on the injury report as late as he did, because regardless, he's not going to be out there 100% if he is playing. And this is a Bucs run game that I really don't have that much faith in to begin with. So, if they're operating on spare parts or even Rachaad White not at 100%, I just don't think they're going to get the job done. I think if the Bucs do anything on offense this week to win the game, they're going to have to rely on Baker. He's going to have to air it out, and that's going to be a challenge. You just talked about that being the strength of this Colts defense, but I do think the Bucs have the necessary tools to get it done. Mike Evans still healthy, Chris Godwin still healthy, even though he hasn't quite been used as much as we would like him to. Maybe this is the week. But really, I think the biggest X factor on offense for the Bucs this week is going to be the involvement of Trey Palmer. I think that's going to be one of the biggest difference makers in how they're able to move the ball down the field this week. But Cody, I'll toss it back over to you, talking a little bit more about the Colts defense, your expectations for this week in the matchup.
I think it definitely is going to be a challenge, just knowing the skill positions that Tampa Bay still has. You've had those for years, and it's always been a challenge. But I do think the Colts have the opportunity here, to be able to play some pretty good football on them. It is unfortunate that Julius Brent is not playing in this game. We were hoping he'd come back after the bye. He's missed the last couple weeks, but they still do have some corners that I think can can do their jobs pretty decently. Jalen Jones, 7th round pick this year. Nobody really expected him to make, much contribution on the defense. He's been rookie corners in the NFL. He's been very, very good for the Indianapolis Colts. Derek already mentioned the safeties as well, who I think maybe started off the year not super fast, but really have come on the last 3-4 weeks and have really played really, really good football for the Colts. And I am interested, talking about the run game, with Shaquille Leonard not being in there now, gives more of an opportunity for a guy like EJ Speed, who has played well in the limited role he's had, and some of these other linebackers, does that potentially help in some of those areas, maybe where the Colts have struggled, because he really did struggle in the run game and the pass game in a lot of different aspects. So I'm curious kind of how that works out. And then also, I think the Colts are going to have to get pressure early and often on Baker Mayfield. We already know, DeForest Buckner, what he's able to do from that 3 technique position. But they have some other guys on the edge that have shown some flashes. Dayo Adangbo coming off a 3-sack game against the Patriots. He kind of plays a little bit everywhere. He plays inside. He plays outside. He is one of those physical freak guys that the Colts drafted in round 2. Probably would have been a first-round pick if it hadn't been for the Achilles injury he suffered, at the end of his college career, which really forced him to miss half of his rookie season. But he's really starting to come on. And so he's a player you definitely have to know where he's at on the field. He leads the Colts in sacks right now, 6 on the year. He's kind of having a nice bout. He's kind of having a nice breakout year here in year number 3 for him. They have Kwity Paye, who they drafted a couple years ago in the first round. They signed Samson Ebukam in the offseason. He can be a pretty solid edge defender as well. He's never going to be crazy in terms of the sack numbers, but he's a solid all-around player for the Colts. So, and they've been really, really good the last couple weeks, especially at getting after the quarterback. So that'll be something that I'm really interested to see if indeed they're able to slow down this running game. How will they be able to attack this Tampa Bay passing attack that does have some things going for them, and I think it ultimately will come down to, can they get pressure? Can they continue to make life difficult for quarterbacks? And I think if they can do that, they have a good chance in this game to make life tough for this Bucs offense.
Yeah, you talked about DeForest Buckner, what a presence he is at the D tackle position. And honestly, if the Colts are going to get pressure, the conversation for the Bucs every week is that interior offensive line. They've been better. They've been good. They've been above average, I'd argue, at least from where they were at the beginning of the season. But they are still probably the biggest weakness for the Buccaneers on the offensive side of the ball, aside from, the run game that we talk so much about as well. But Aaron Stinney at left guard filling in. I mean, he has taken that job from Matt Filer, and I think he's going to have it for the rest of the season. He's been pretty good, but he is a backup, and at this point, you got to see how consistent he can be week in and week out. We talk about Robert Hainsey not being a natural center. Buck's going to be in the market for another center next season, looking for a replacement. And then you got the rookie Cody Mauch at right guard, who's been good, but he's improving week in and week out, and he can definitely still be taken advantage of at this stage in his NFL career. But Evan, your thoughts on the Buccaneers offense and overall, some of the X factors in this matchup?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned an X factor. I think one of them is Chris Godwin. We've seen really early on this season, Chris Godwin really wasn't that involved in the Bucs offense, and then they started to get him more involved. And what do you know? The Bucs offense started to move the ball a little bit more, and he was involved, and now he sort of dipped a little bit more, especially in that San Francisco game. Like, he did not do much at all in that San Francisco game. It can't just be the Mike Evans show, because especially if Rachaad White doesn't play, then you're limited there as well. You need to have a guy like Chris Godwin who's going to be there with Royal. He can catch the ball. He has a bunch of reliable hands. On a third down, that's who you want to go to. I just think Chris Godwin in this type of matchup is really important, and I think the Buccaneers should, and I do think they will. I don't think they're going to continue to ignore him. I think they're going to try and get the ball to him early and often, and I think they're going to test this this Indy secondary out. Which it's interesting that they are better against the pass, which doesn't bode great for the Buccaneers, because like we just talked about, the Bucs' strength on offense is the passing game. It is utilizing those weapons. So with that, they're going to have to get a little bit creative on how they get the ball to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and even Cade Otton and Rachaad White if he does play. If Rachaad White doesn't play, how are they going to get the ball to Chase Edmonds? But I do think one of the keys to unlocking this offense is Chris Godwin. The Bucs offense, we mentioned, has been better. But I do think that, especially with the defense being as banged up as it is, I don't think you can expect the defense to carry its weight or as much weight as it has this whole season with so many inexperienced players most likely filling important roles. So I think the offense is going to have to step up in this one, and I think Chris Godwin's a big key for that. And I also think protecting Baker Mayfield, being able to protect him well, and hopefully, he had 2 turnovers last week and had a couple where they were dropped picks. He could have had a few more. Hopefully it doesn't become a trend because he's done such a good job this season of limiting the turnovers. And I think that's been a big reason for his success. And every week when we do the Q&A for Bucs Nation, people ask me, "Oh, Baker Mayfield's been a big story. What has it been?" And I say the same thing almost every time. Like, the turnovers that he has been able to limit has been a huge key for not only his success but the Bucs offense as a whole. Because turnovers are just killer. I mean, they're absolutely killer and can't happen. So the Bucs offense is going to need to, especially with a shortened, banged up defense, the Bucs offense is really going to need to avoid giving this Indy offense short field. So I think playing a clean game and being able to get Chris Godwin involved is pretty important in this one.
Yeah, especially with the road they have for the rest of the season. Not much room for error on both sides of the ball for the Buc, but especially this week. One last question before we get to score predictions. It's from our buddy Richard T on the West Coast in chat, and he brings up an interesting point. Derek, I want to toss it to you. You can take the lead on this one, but are the Colts better off without Shaq Leonard? We talked at the beginning of the show about how big of a departure that was for your defense, at least from people with an outside perspective, because, obviously he just hasn't been the same player. But in the long run, did the Colts kind of rip off a Band-Aid here?
Yeah, I mean, long term, yeah, that it was the right thing to do. I know Cody and I had made a video about it earlier in the week when it happened. It's just one of those situations where the injuries that had piled up from Shaq over the years, it's just gotten to be too much for him. It's gotten to be too much. It just didn't go well for him. And we have seen it, especially over the last several weeks, that he has just not been the same player. He's missed tackles that he normally would do. He has been blown off of his assignment by linemen that he typically doesn't have happen, and he hasn't been able to force turnovers like the way that he normally has, which is his bread and butter. That's what made him so special, was his ability to force turnovers. In his 4 seasons prior to what was going on, he had 28 turnovers all by himself, which is incredible for a player of his stature. So it's one of those situations where we've seen it. He's just not the same player. It's a shock, yes. But at the end of the day, long term, you're saving a lot of money if you're the Indianapolis Colts by making this move, as harsh as it may seem. Because the Colts have a really great linebacker core. They don't need Shaq Leonard, which is a crazy thing to say, because if you'd have told me that 2 years ago, I said you were crazy, because Shaq Leonard was the best player on this defense by a long shot. But at this point, he is not even, some would argue he's not even the 3rd best linebacker on our team right now, which, I mean, this goes to show you his value is just not worth what you're paying him. And at the end of the day, you're not going to make that contract be any lower, because you're not going to just say, "Hey, give me half the money back that we told you, that we gave you, rightfully so." So at the end of the day, you had to make the decision. You feel good about the linebacker core you had, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, and I think also in addition to just kind of, and I think this is something that from what people had said, it was something that I think rubbed the Colts the wrong way, was just the public talking to the media about, the lack of playing time, and kind of airing that out there for everybody to hear. And then when he gets the opportunity, he completely is just not, taking advantage of that opportunity. And I think, it comes back to that accountability, right? It doesn't matter if you're paying a player what you're paying him, right? If he is hindering your team and he's hindering your defense, like, I don't care if you took him, first overall, it doesn't matter. And I think that was just something that it needed to happen. I think we were all surprised at when it happened, but I guess the way that I've made it make sense for me is like, hey, you knew it was obvious he wasn't a part of your future. He wasn't coming back next year. There was no question. So you want to get a good look coming off the bye at some of these other linebackers that you have. EJ Speed, I mentioned, Saguna Luby, who will probably get a lot more of a role here. He was a undrafted rookie this year. Like some of those guys that you want to get more of a look at, who you do believe do have a chance to be a part of your future. I think that for the reasons Derek said, and also for those reasons, it just made a lot of sense for the Colts to rip off the Band-Aid now. And, if Leonard really believes that he, is the player that deserves, a more playing time, that he can go out to a team that can potentially give him more playing time. So I think the Colts probably did him a favor there in that department because, they came to him earlier in the week and told him before they cut him, they said he was going to be inactive. So it's not like he was going to even get any snaps in this defense. So for me, it made sense, I guess, with everything going on, but it definitely was a surprise at the when it happened, not that it happened.
Yeah, I get what you mean 100%. Now, looking at the game for both teams this week, a must-win game for both teams this week. And for the Bucs, Evan, I know you declared the Bucs season over a couple of weeks ago after the loss to Houston, but this is it. Like this legitimately, I feel like is the last shot the Bucs have to prove that they're going to be any type of relevant team here down the stretch. Because yes, the door for the NFC South is still open, but if you're going to be a team that shows up in the postseason, you're going to have to beat a Colts team like this. They still have Gardner Minshew, but he's been playing like crap lately. And they don't have their starting quarterback. They are ravished on the defensive side of the ball. They have been good. You talked about the young talent that are stepping up, especially in the secondary, because, man, you guys lost everybody. But, they're still a team that I just think if you're going to be a division champion, you have to beat them. Yeah, you have to beat them. They are really not going to be imposing down the stretch. I don't think the Bucs have a chance to be either, but if they do, it starts with beating this Colts team this week, and that's what they're going to have to do. Will they do it? Oh, man. My score prediction for this one, I think it's a low-scoring game. Not a lot of offense for both of these teams. Maybe we do see a good amount of pass attempts for Baker Mayfield, but I don't know if it equates to over 28 points on the day. So I do think the Bucs eke out a victory in this one, and it is a pretty close game coming down to the wire. I've got the Bucs coming out on top 24-21. Evan, what is your score prediction?
Yeah, we've talked about it, and honestly, like you say, all right, this is it.
We say that every week.
I know, yeah, but I think, the next two games you have after this one, I believe, next week is definitely against Carolina. And I believe the week after that's against Atlanta. So that's two divisional games. I would argue those two are the ones that, you got to win. However, the thing would be if you lose this one, you have to win both of them, right? There is no room for error. You have to win both of them. Really, you lose this one, you drop to 4-7 with, 6 games remaining. Even if you go, you have to go, 4-2? Maybe 4-2 wins you the division. No guarantee. You may still lose out on the division. So I think you're making life a lot harder for yourself if you lose this game. When the Bucs' backs have been against the wall, they've typically responded pretty well, honestly. They had a crushing loss against the Houston Texans. Just a season changer, in my opinion. That if they don't make the playoffs, I think that's going to be the reason why. I think and if Todd Bowles is fired, I think you're going to look at that game as the reason why. But they came back the next week with their backs against the wall in a game they had to have to snap a 3-game losing streak, or it was 4 at that point, to snap a 4-game losing streak against the Tennessee Titans, and they played pretty well. So while I don't think it's going to be pretty, with all the injuries that the Bucs do have on defense, I do think the Bucs are going to win this game. I think it's going to be super, super close. I'm going to go 21-20 Buccaneers. I think they just barely edge it out. I think the offense does just enough while the defense, the guys step up. And sometimes, when you're playing shorthanded like that, sometimes you play a little bit better. I think you can play a little bit looser. And then these guys are going to come in there, Servassier Dennis and Josh Hayes and Yaya Diaby and all these guys, they're going to come in there with something to prove. And I think sometimes you just get hungrier players there. So I think it's going to matter. And I look at the Colts' past 2 wins, and just like Cody said, they haven't been pretty. Well, they were both against the Panthers and the Patriots. And I'm not a guy who anybody can beat anybody, right? I'm not the guy who says, well, since this team beat this team's better or whatever. But I do think the Buccaneers are better than both the Panthers and the Patriots. So I think if the Colts continue to play like they have, I don't know if those performances are going to be enough to beat Tampa Bay. So I do think the Buccaneers are just going to squeak this one out and improve to 5-6 and essentially really take some pressure off, because you don't want to have back-to-back losses here.
All right. So I agree. The last 2 weeks for the Colts, they haven't been pretty. They just haven't won in very I guess the Carolina game maybe more so, but even then the offense was not doing very much. It was very much the defense and Kenny Moore in that game, and so I do think it was like we said earlier, the perfect time for the Colts to have this bye, for them to look at the film, for Shane Steichen and company, for everything, just to be able to kind of reevaluate some things on the offense. And so I have enough faith in Shane Steichen that I feel like the Indianapolis Colts will bounce back in some ways in their passing game. One guy we forgot to mention, and I don't know how we forgot to mention him, Josh Downs, the rookie out of North Carolina. He has been sensational this year. And the last 2 weeks, I don't think it's any I think it is a correlation to why they've struggled. He has been injured, but he's played, but he's been very limited. Even so, he's made some plays, even though he's been injured. And so getting him back fully healthy, I think, is huge for this passing game. A very, very susceptible defense to the passing attack. I think that the Colts are going to be able to pass it a lot more than they have the last couple weeks. I think Josh Downs is going to be probably the X factor in this game, especially with Tampa Bay a little bit beat up back there. So I think the Colts are going to get some things right in terms of their offense. I think they're going to really start being able to open it up a little bit. Gardner Minshew has some time to kind of chill out a little bit from what he was doing. And I think the Colts are going to get back to some of that success we saw, in the Cleveland games and things of that nature, because the last 2 games have been more of the outlier for this offense. They had been one of the best and most efficient offenses in the NFL, and they kind of just dropped off. And so I think they're going to get back. They're going to get some things right. Shane Steichen, he was, the Colts, had all those interviews with those guys, and they believed in Shane Steichen for a reason. And so even without Anthony Richardson, I think the Colts will get some things right in this game. I think they will score over 20 points in this game. I do think the Bucs, like you said, they are a better team than the last two weeks the Colts have played. They're better than the Patriots. They're better than the Panthers. I don't have any question about that. But I do think the Colts will do just enough. I think it will be a close game, but I think the Bucs are beat up. They're coming off, from literally the other side of the country. They're beat up and they have a lot of things not going in their favor. Now, again, the Colts have not been great at home this year. So, there's a lot of different factors going both ways. But in my mind, I had a score of 24-20. The Colts coming out on top, and I do think it will really come down to who has the ball to end the game, and I think the Colts will do just enough with the running game. Getting Zach Moss a little bit more involved in the running game with Jonathan Taylor, and also being able to get Gardner Minshew a little bit more right than he's been. So I think that'll be just enough. But again, I do think it's going to be a very competitive game, and ultimately it's a huge game, like we said, for both teams. So, but I do have the Colts just barely winning this one.
Yeah, I think that Indianapolis will figure out some things. I mean, this is not going to be like 2021 where, Frank Reich forgot that Jonathan Taylor is on this football team, and then proceed to not run the football with him for about 2 quarters. I don't think that's going to be a situation here. Shane Steichen has this team playing at a much better pace right now. And obviously, coming off the bye, you're a lot more refreshed. You got a lot more time to strategize. I think that Indy has this one coming for them. I think I'm right in the middle with everyone here. I'm going to go Indy wins this one by a score of 27-21. Both will remain in the 20s.
The most points in a projection so far, though. We can all agree that I don't know if it's going to be too much of a shootout this week, but I do like pass attempts on Baker Mayfield this week if you are a betting person, which I am. With that being said, I believe that's just about going to do it for this week's game preview episode of the Cannon Fire podcast. Thank you to Cody and Derek from Bring the Juice. It is a pleasure, as always, collaborating with you guys, and we love chopping it up and talking ball with you. Where can people find you, your show, and some more great content from you?
Yeah, you can find us pretty much anywhere. You can find us on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I always will call it Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. Find us on YouTube at Bring the Juice. And yeah, you can find us on pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts as well. So it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those things. You can find us on there as well. And then you can find me on Twitter at CPFoger55. And Derek, I'll let them know where they can find you and all your stuff.
Cody said everything there, but follow me on Twitter, Derek_Larger. I need to catch Cody and followers.
There you go, man. Yep. Make sure you guys show them some love. It is a pleasure as always. And they put out really
recording stopped
YouTube content, YouTube content in particular. You know, I love the work that you guys do. And you do a great job with that channel. You can find our stuff, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter /X. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host, Evan, on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL. Check out his written work at BucsNation.com. Evan, what have you got on the slate this week?
Well, right now, I got the Q&A with the Colts site, Stampede Blue. So that's out on the site right now. Go check that out. It is actually interesting because a lot of the things that we talked about in that article were things that you guys share with us also, especially the biggest thing I took away was the Shaq Leonard news. The guy I spoke with basically said, like, wasn't surprised it happened, but was surprised it happened at this point in the season. So I get that sentiment a lot from Colts fans there. So yeah, go check that out on BucsNation.com right now.
Last but not least, you can find myself, Instagram and Twitter /X at Redicus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. But that's the show. Strip Matthews signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish, and our guests from Bring the Juice, Derek Larger and Cody Felger. Thank you guys once again. We'll talk to you Sunday after the game live right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Cannon Fire Podcast. Should be a great game. We'll talk to you then. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening.